Welcome to the Big Picture Film Club. I'm joined by Gio Arlotta, the filmmaker behind which we intend to cause havoc. The film follows the 21st century formation of Zambia's most popular rock band of the 1970s, Witch, and documents the life of its lead singer, Jagari. Before we head into our interview, here's a short clip from the documentary.
An incredible thing to happen, to have a record, by a Zambian band. And it was a real revelation for the rest of us. It was kind of opening a doorway that nobody had kind of peeped through before. You could actually go to there were certain stores that you could buy these records from, and you could go and buy this record and play and hear these people. I think what was different is because you could actually see them, you knew them, it wasn't you're listening to the Rolling Stones or something, you were actually listening to a band with people who were singing in your language. People were dressing like them, people were dancing like them and trying to sing like them. They really opened up and out so that people just felt like, these guys can do it, we can do it, and inspired a lot of other people to actually just jump on stage or grab a guitar and actually start doing that as well. So you suddenly get all these rock bands coming up.
I'm joined by Gio Arlotta, and that was Witch. I firstly wanted to say, Gio, that it's a very fascinating documentary, and it's very eye-opening, and I think you've sort of tapped into a story that's not widely known, even among like music aficionados. For those who don't sort of know, like what is the ZamRock movement, and how do Witch sort of fit into this?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and I'm really happy that you enjoyed the film. So to give a description of ZamRock to somebody who's never heard of it, ZamRock was the main musical movement in Zambia in the 1970s, which was inspired by a lot of Anglo-American music of rock and roll from those days, namely the heavier stuff. That's what they were into. They were into Jimi Hendrix, who was a demigod for most most of Zambian youth back then, as well as Black Sabbath, Grand Funk Railroad, Deep Purple. They were really into that stuff, and the Rolling Stones, obviously. But being there in Zambia, they also noticed that there was something missing. So they brought in their own traditional sort of rhythms to that music, and thus created ZamRock, Zambian rock. And even, which is something interesting, because even in the more basic compositions from Witch or from ZamRock bands, it sounds like Western rock and roll, but then the drummer is just so much groovier, so it changes that thing a little bit. And in this sort of ZamRock world, which could be compared to the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, they were like the band, they were the first band to record an album back then, a Zambian album, a Zambian pop album. They were the first band to do that in 1972, 73. And they were the ones that were filling stadiums. They were the ones that had crazy people screaming at their concerts. They had concerts where like the police had to be called up because people tried to break into the concert hall or whatever. Like they were the stars, like the biggest band from that era.
Jagari is the lead singer of Witch, and he is a very interesting character, a very fascinating story. Um, and what can you describe? What was your first impressions of sort of meeting with Jagari, and how did you see him change from that first meeting to the point where you might have first seen him on stage? Because I see when he's on stage, he is very much Jagari. And so can you kind of talk us through that sort of transition in terms of how you saw him?
Sure. I mean, the first time that I met Jagari, I was waiting for him at a hotel restaurant in Kitwe in the Copperbelt region. He showed up 2.5 hours late with a guitar swung around his back, but with the biggest smile on his face. And he was, very welcoming right away. Very happy that somebody had come from so far to find out more about his life and about his music. And I was all ears because I was super curious about everything, and I started to understand a little bit of where things were coming from and so on and so forth. This was in 2014, and about 2 weeks later is when I first saw him perform in Zambia, which was at the celebration of the 50 years of Zambian independence in October 2014. And when he got on stage, he got on stage just to quickly sing two songs. I think one was "It's All Right" and the other one was "Satisfaction" by the Rolling Stones. And he just went nuts. And I was like, what is this? What's going on? He was like grabbing microphones, like throwing them, like he had two microphones. He would sprint to one and then get closer. He's like, no, I'm going to sing from the other one. Like, I don't know, like doing somersaults, push-ups, like whatever, And I was like, my God, like, who is this guy? Because he's quite, he's very, when you speak to him, he's very like composed, and so on and so forth. And then when he's on stage, he just unleashes it all. And you're like, what? He's just the most entertaining performer I've seen, I think, and it's kind of like a switch that happens. But, also one thing that I guess we have to understand is the fact that, well, he's turning 70 this year.
Oh, wow.
So, he's in his normal life, he's a grandfather, he's chilled and so on. But once he hits the stage, something takes over and it just goes wild. He's more energetic than a performer half his age.
Yeah. And so for you, as a kind of thinking with your documentary filmmaker hat now, what for you made the switch to be like, one, oh, this is just simply an interesting story that I've come across, to being like, hold on, I really want to devote many hours, months, years of my life to documenting this person's life and the movement surrounding it. And so internally, how did you make that switch from this is simply an interesting story to know about to like, no, I need to document this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that this again happened very early on. I remember when, again, at this concert where I saw Jagari perform for the 50 years of Zambian independence, they had formed a band of like ZamRock All Stars. And when I was there, when they were practicing, and I heard them practice a couple of times. I was like, my God, the world needs to hear this. This needs to be seen. Like this energy that they have, this incredible music, and so on. And so I kind of made a vow to myself that I wouldn't stop until I could do my best to bring it. And also, with Jagari, like he was so. We became friends quite fast, and I felt that I kind of owed it to him, not owed it to him, but like I loved his music so much, and I could see that, he was a great person, and, he had it, that I wanted to do all that I could to make sure that he would get the recognition that he rightfully deserves, And so if something that initially I was very geeked out. I was geeking out on the musical aspect of it, like what happened, what changed between the third and the fourth album or whatever, which was a lot of my research footage was very into that. But then I came back to Europe and I met up with Tim Spreng, who shot the film and is a producer in the film. And he was like, well, the music is really interesting, but his life story is super interesting too. He was a rock star, then he went to he became a teacher, went to jail, became a miner. Now the music is coming back, like that's also really interesting. And I was like, I guess it is. Let's find out more, and sort of that's what we did.
So how long did it take to sort of put the documentary
Well,
together?
like as I said, I started shooting the research footage in 2014.
Hmm.
Then we went back down with the crew and with Yako, with the musicians from Europe in April 2016. Then we got Jagari to come and tour Europe in September 2017. Spent the whole of 2018 editing because we had like 200 hours of footage.
Wow.
So
Wow.
to get down to like an hour and a half, it's like 0.75% of what we shot. So like
Hmm.
it was a lot of like looking at the footage. Then we cut it a certain way. Then like I took every scene, put it in a card, mixed it around, and gave it a different face, and all of that. And so it took a while, and then we presented it in Lisbon in May of 2019. So it took about 5 years, I would say. A lot of that clearly had to do with finding funds, and like whenever each one of us got some money in, we'd put it in the film, and then we could go a step further, and then we'd have to wait until something else happened, and then eventually we managed, I guess.
And you know, what how have audiences reconnected with the music of that sort of time period, and did you find that with both, I guess, European audiences and, or young people in Zambia themselves, was there this sort of, I guess it feels like it was this sort of almost lost time period
Mhm.
that people have reconnected with? Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, in Zambia, when we played the show there, half of the people there were the ones that saw the band live back
Yeah.
in the day. The rest were younger kids that were just curious to see what the fuss was about,
Hmm.
and they perhaps didn't know the songs, or like it's actually a scene, and it's something that in Zambia not many people know about unless they lived it.
Hmm.
Like it often happened that people came up to Jaggery when I was with him, and they're like, "Oh, I thought I had the first ever rock band in Zambia," like a 17-year-old kid, like, I thought I had the first. I was like, but then we discovered it was ZamRock, and then,
Nice.
so people are still learning about it, and it's something that I hope that the film, when it gets shown in Zambia, it can really sort of like give uh, this history that's missing, this archive, to show Zambians that this was done there. Do it again, or do something
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like that. Whilst in Europe, obviously it's different because I mean, there is like the one or two Zambians that live in some place that we tour that come and see it and
Hmm.
know it from the 70s, but the rest is younger people that know it because they're record collectors or whatnot, So but the energy is great, and was great in both places. Like everybody's dancing, and it's funny sometimes promoters would come up to us after a show and they'll be like, "This is weird. I thought it was a rock concert, but everybody's dancing. Like, what's going on?" So yeah.
Cool. And just a final, just really quick question. I guess what surprised you most throughout this documenting process that I suppose you weren't either expecting or taken aback by?
Well, I guess the humanity about everyone, and like also being in Zambia and seeing everybody so happy to see, because like when we were shooting certain times on the street, people would come up to us and be like, "Are you BBC?" And we'd be like, "No, we're independent production." And like, "What are you doing?" Like a bit, like, "What are you doing here?" Like, "Oh, we're shooting this documentary about W.I.T.C.H, Zambian music in the 70s, blah blah." Like, "Oh, so you're doing something promoting the country?" And we're like, "Yeah." And they come and hug you, and I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
That was amazing, and that's something that really, when we were there, like we really felt that like we're doing the right thing, and that really kept us going, kept the energy levels high, and meeting certain people that were involved in the scene back in the day, but then had a hard life after that, and seeing the joy and the sparkle in their eyes when we talk about the good old days
Mm,
was priceless.
wonderful. Well, Gio Arlotta, thank you very much for your time. I recommend everybody to go and see Which when it's released. It's a very insightful, feel-good documentary. very educational, and very fun. Just very fun. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bryce.